Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. And if you are just tuning in with me for the very first time, it's so nice to meet you. And I'm really glad you're here with me today. I am your host, Heather Carey, nutritionist, chef, mom, and a woman who has been around the block with food. I want to open up about real food in relation to health, weight, and our bodies so you can make peace with what you eat. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Real Food Stories. Today, we are talking all things gardening because, as some of you may know, I consider myself somewhat of an obsessive vegetable gardener. There is nothing better to me than going out in your garden and picking fresh vegetables that you have grown with your own two hands. And I am one of those people that excitedly waits for the seed catalogs to arrive in my mailbox the day after Christmas. When it comes to healthy eating and living, I consider vegetable gardening one of the top things you can do for your health. But I know people have reasons to not grow their own food. You might be super busy or you don't even know how to get started. So today I am deferring to a real expert to talk about the benefits of growing your own food and what it really takes to do just that. And it's not as hard as I think people imagine. Greg Peterson is a lifelong food growing aficionado who first became interested at a very early age with aquaculture. And as a teenager was growing his own fish to eat. That's very interesting. I want to hear about that. During that time, he discovered the fragility of our food system and started growing his own food. And by the 90s, he discovered permaculture, which transformed his life from the linear way of thinking to a regenerative or circular way of thinking. In 2001, he started the Urban Farm, an online portal for farming education. Greg transformed his home into what is called, in permaculture, an old growth food forest. And Greg, just like me, believes the most important thing we can be doing right now is understanding where our food comes from and how to grow our own. Because as he says, we have a very broken food system in the world. And I could not agree more. So welcome to the show, Greg. I'm really happy to have you on here today. It is spring where I am. I am in my garden right now. I couldn't be more happy about that. And I want to talk to you about just the importance of growing your own food and getting educated on where food comes from. But I think first, let's hear your story about Urban Farm and how you got started and your garden story.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. And it's been an interesting lifelong journey for me. It's kind of like I don't have any other explanation except I was born with this mission in mind. Because I got my first fish aquarium when I was 9. I bought it from paper route money. And the reason I did that is because I was interested in growing fish to eat. And by the time I was 15, I was running a small business. I used to, because of my interest in fish, I used to hang out at the fish store in my neighborhood. And one day, the guy that worked at the fish store said, "Hey, Greg, you want to help me clean a fish pond on Sunday?" And it was like, yeah. And I think he paid me $5 in 1975. And I went and did it. And when we got done, he said, "You know what? I don't want to do this anymore. Why don't you take over my clients?" He had 2 or 3 clients that he was servicing. And so literally at the age of 15, I was given a small business to start running. And I'd had a paper route before that. So I kind of got an idea of what it would take. And so between 1975 and 1984, for that 9-year period, I used to clean, service, and build fish ponds in Phoenix. But better yet, I used to clean, service, and build aquaculture ponds for people to grow their own food. And during that same period, sometime around the time I was 14 or 15, I wrote a paper for my biology class in pencil on how we were overfishing the oceans. So this is, sometimes it's a curse. Sometimes, most of the time it's a gift. but I have this knowledge about how our food system works that I just have to share.
So this is just something you were born with. It sounds like it's, something we wonder how we got into the careers we get into, and there is no explanation, right?
Right?
You're just born with an interest in learning about
Exactly.
our food.
And
So
then in and then
go
in
ahead.
1981, so I was 20 in 1981. I was serving on the board of the Arizona Aquaculture Association. Yes, one in Arizona. And we went to visit a fish farm in Gila Bend, and they were harvesting tilapia there, cutting them up, removing the meat, and throwing away 70% of the fish. And that just didn't make sense to me. So on paper, back then on paper, I designed what we would now call a regenerative fish farm or a farm where everything gets used. There's no waste. Fast forward 10 years, and I discovered this thing called permaculture. I like to call permaculture the art and science of working with nature. And I did a permaculture design course, which is a 72-hour deep dive into introduction to permaculture. And permaculture is the art and science of working in the flow of nature. And for me, that 72 hours was one great big aha about, oh my gosh, there's something we can call the way that I think. Because I don't think in a linear manner. I think in a circular manner. We as human beings, and I challenge your listeners to come up with a system that humans have created that is circular or regenerative. Because as far as I can tell, in 30 years of looking, every single human system that has been put in place is degenerative. It breaks down eventually and goes away. The microphone you're speaking into, our cell phones, the roads, our pipelines, everything has to be diligently maintained. Otherwise, it's going to go away. And that's not how nature works. Nature works in a regenerative circular pattern.
Such a good point. I mean, I know from just my own vegetable garden, right? It is like the circle of life, right?
Yeah,
You plant, then you take all that, the scraps and everything, right? You put them in your compost. That becomes the dirt that goes back into your garden the next year, and it's just this big circle, and it's lovely, and you're right that I didn't even think about that there really is no other system, right, in our lives that does that
yeah,
so efficiently.
right. Oh my
That's
gosh.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So I recently moved from Phoenix, Arizona after living there for 55 years to Asheville, North Carolina. I bought a small property. We bought 4 acres here and we're turning it into a farm. And talking about composting and composting food waste, the first thing I did when I got here is I set up a worm bin, a worm composting bin. That's how I do all my composting. And over the course of the first year, we put all our food scraps in the compost bin. And when I plant fruit trees, I run a fruit tree education program in Phoenix. And so I'm really big into fruit trees because you plant them once and you get food for decades. That's the thing I love about fruit trees. But I have a very specific way to plant fruit trees. And this includes adding 1 pound, ideally, if you have it, of worm castings, worm poop. It's high in nutrients, it's high in microbiology, and you add it to the planting hole. And so last summer we planted 160 fruit trees and berry bushes, and I took just because I didn't have enough, I took a couple of handfuls of worm castings and put them in every planting hole. And this was in May, June, and July. And by August, we had over 40 tomato plants growing in the basins where I planted the fruit trees. And we were harvesting 4 to 6 pounds of tomatoes a day from our orchard where we didn't purposely plant tomatoes and we didn't purposely water them. They were just growing wild out there. And so back to your intro to me, Gardening can be that easy if we let nature be.
So let's back up a little bit because I am assuming I said just off air before that I know a lot of people who like I am obsessed with my vegetable garden, but not
Nice.
everyone is, right? I mean,
Yes.
I think you and I are probably in the minority at this point with gardens and stuff. And I know people who said like I have a container on my deck or something, but I think it's just so important for the bigger picture of our health. So
Yes.
how do people, we're talking about worm castings and composting, and I get your lingo. I totally understand what you're talking about in your worm bin and everything, but a lot of people may not understand this. So let's like back up a second. How do people then start in gardening? When they are just there, they have an interest and they want to get started, but they have no idea where to start. That's what I
Yeah.
wanted to kind of cover today.
Cool. We can absolutely do that.
Yeah,
You
because
start.
I think it's like, I mean, gardening is not that difficult.
Mm,
Right? Would you agree? But there are some things that need to be there, right?
yes.
We have certain conditions.
Yes.
So
And
where would people start?
well, so it can be as simple as a pot of basil in a sunny windowsill. It really is that simple. The most expensive thing to buy in the grocery store and the easiest thing to grow are herbs. So if you cook at all and want to use fresh herbs, grow some fresh herbs in a pot on your patio.
Yeah, no,
It's,
that definitely is right. And I tell people that too. If you don't even have space, right? If you have no yard,
yeah,
get a container, right?
yeah.
But
And the most important thing to put in that pot is healthy soil. If you just dig dirt out of your yard, good luck.
yeah, because most of our soil is, I know here in Connecticut, my soil is really heavy in clay. It's just,
Yep,
it doesn't drain well, so I have
yep,
to, and that's the benefit of the compost. It helps to amend the soil, right, and balance it. Because let's talk about soil for a second. Because soil is its own living, breathing like entity, right? It needs to be balanced, right? There needs to be
yeah,
like a certain balance, and there's microorganisms in there,
yeah.
and what's the importance of the soil?
So there's 5 components to healthy soil. And in order to grow healthy plants that make healthy food, you need to build healthy soil. So the 5 components are dirt, and dirt has a lot of, it could be clay and other things. It's usually pretty dense, but it has a lot of minerals in it that the plants need. But if all you have is dirt, good luck. So the 5 components are dirt, airspace, water, organic matter, and everything that's alive in the soil. And
Okay.
so if you have a dirt backyard, front yard, the solution to fixing that dirt is to add lots and lots and lots of organic matter. Because as you work the organic matter into the soil, it fluffs the soil. So there's more airspace in the soil. The water can get in that way. And that organic matter brings in soil life, soil microorganisms, which is ultimately that's what we're after. We're after to get those microorganisms working with the plants because there's this beneficial relationship that goes on between the roots of plants and the microorganisms, where the microorganisms help harvest the nutrients out of the soil so that the plants can uptake the nutrients.
Yeah, so I don't even think a lot of people would equate soil with like something like living and breathing, right? Like it's like alive.
Exactly.
And you need this organic matter to like fluff it and get it to like to keep moving and living
Yeah.
and producing. What would be organic matter? Just assuming that people are like, this is like gardening 101, right? Like
Yes.
what would be like like an example of organic matter to put into your soil to get it fluffed up and living and breathing?
Well, the easiest things, if you're getting a pot, go to your local nursery and get a bag of planting mix And it's usually made up of cocoa peat and maybe some worm castings and uh, perlite and compost, that kind of stuff. And for the soil, you're looking for something that's OMRI certified, OMRI. And it's a little logo that'll be on the bag that's telling you that it's organic. And often what I do when I'm planting in pots is I just get a nice potting mix, and you get what you pay for. So if you're paying $3 a bag for it, it's probably not that great. If you're paying $18 a bag for it, that's probably a lot better.
Hmm.
And so get yourself a nice potting mix that's OMRI certified and put it in the pot and plant your seeds or plant your plant. It's really that simple.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the simple version of
Yeah,
it. And when you
exactly.
say like the worm castings are like worm poop, right? They
Yep,
eat what's in the soil and then they poop it. And then that's like something that is like compost that then adds more nutrients into your soil, correct?
exactly, exactly.
Okay.
So, and you said something real interesting. The compost and the worm castings have biology in them. They have microorganisms in them that help the plants, and that's so incredibly important. And when
Absolutely.
you and when you add chemical fertilizers, non-organic, actually all fertilizers are chemicals, but non-organic fertilizers and chemicals like pesticides or herbicides and that kind of stuff, when you add that, it negatively impacts the soil biology. So that's one of the big reasons we only want to ever use organic fertilizers.
So commercial fertilizers might like get you to grow like giant tomatoes or something, right? Or like, something like
Mhm.
that's not normal, but it's not benefiting the
Soil life.
nutrients and soil, right? And then ultimately probably your vegetables.
Exactly. Exactly. Because when you have organic soil underneath the plant with organic fertilizers, it's nurturing the biology in the pot or in the dirt. And that biology is helping your plant uptake the nutrients that it needs. And those nutrients are good for our body and they improve the taste of the food. That's so incredibly important.
Yeah. And there's nothing better than going out into your garden and picking tomatoes or, something that you've just grown and eating them. You can't compare it really to anything.
Anything, exactly. One of the fruit trees,
Yeah.
the harvesting a ripe peach off of a peach tree is nothing you will ever experience in a grocery store.
Right.
The peaches and stone fruit in grocery stores are hard and crunchy, and because what they're doing is they're harvesting it before it's ripe. They have to. Do you know what food miles are?
I don't think so.
Food miles are the amount of miles, the number of miles that food travels from
Oh,
where it's
yes.
grown to where you eat it. And you want to take a guess at the average food miles in the United States?
I'm going to say 2000. Am I
Good
overreaching?
guess. 1,500 is
Okay.
generally,
Hmm.
but 1,500 miles. So what they're doing is they're harvesting that peach or that tomato or whatever else you're eating. They're harvesting it 2 to 4 weeks early. So all of a sudden, that fruit or vegetable isn't completely nutrient dense because those vegetables, those fruits, as they ripen on the tree, become more nutrient dense
Yeah,
and they
I know.
become better for you. So they're harvesting this fruit that isn't totally nutrient dense. Once you harvest it off of the tree or plant, the nutrient density starts declining slowly. So we're getting food that's not fully nutrient dense for us when we're picking it and shipping it and having it wait 2 to 4 weeks or 3 months in that for that matter.
So that's a good question. So because there's that local food movement, right? Like, eat locally and eat,
Hmm.
and eat within like a few miles of where you live and everything. But that's not always possible. I mean, I know I live in Connecticut, so
Right.
I'm not getting, in January, nothing's growing here.
Yeah.
And I guess I could live off of carrots and potatoes and things that are stored in in storage, cold storage,
Hmm.
but that would get boring, after a little while. So what is the solution, I think, to grow? But and then on the other hand, I now see watermelon in January, peaches. I mean, my husband just came home the other day with, he went to the grocery store and came home with plums. And I said, "Where did you even get those from?" I mean, it's still early April here. Like they're not,
Yep.
clearly they've traveled very, very far. And I didn't even want to try it because I can't imagine that they would even taste good.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is we want to eat local as possible. Probably when you
Mhm.
were living in Arizona, you had more availability of stuff, but here in like the Northeast, what's the solution to that then?
Doing the best that we can. That's really the solution. Having an understanding of what's in season and generally gravitating toward that. This time of year, if there's, peaches or plums or out of season fruit at the grocery store, I don't buy it
No, I
because
don't buy it
often
either. My husband, I didn't tell him to buy it. I was like, "What are you doing?" I was almost like offended that he did that. But
so
yeah, no, I wouldn't either.
because out of season fruit like that is coming from South America, it's coming from Australia, believe it or not. And it's just traveling super far. So for those reasons, I choose not to eat that out of season. So right now, citrus is in season. So the citrus, I can't grow it here. I grew it in Phoenix when I was there, but I can't grow it in Asheville, North Carolina. But I know that it's coming from Florida or California. So at least the citrus I'm eating is somewhat local to the United States. It's not traveling as far. So really the solution is to have a general understanding of what's in season and then gravitate toward that. Now, we eat bananas here every week because we like bananas, and they're available 12 months a year, and they're coming from South America. So it's just an ethical boundary or balancing act that you have to do for what works for you. And
Yeah.
so yeah, and what I tell people is generally, understand what's in season and eat that when you can.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer to that question, is that we have to do the best we can because there are things. I mean, I know that in the winter I'm guilty. I'm eating berries and blueberries and stuff because I know just nutritionally they're good for me. I mean, I
Yep.
want to be
Yeah.
eating them. I try to eat like maybe frozen blueberries and freeze things and have it.
Hmm.
Like I'll make pesto in the summer and then I'll have it in my freezer, so I can
Yes.
have that in the winter. But I think it's doing the best that we can.
Yeah.
And
With what we have.
yeah, and I guess fortunately some food does travel, and so like bananas, so we can have access to those. So let's go back to the starting the garden.
Okay.
And we talked about the soil. That's definitely the most important thing, right? I think too, starting if you have poor soil and like just dead soil, kind of,
Hmm.
like things are not going to grow well. What's the next? And I just want to grow a couple containers on my deck. What are the other important things? Are there other?
So adding soil is great. One of the big things, you have to do this. Get yourself a planting calendar for your area because we cannot count on the big box stores and sometimes local nurseries to bring in the climate and season appropriate plants. So one of the things I used to laugh at the big box stores in April and May was they'd be in Phoenix, they'd be bringing in broccoli. Broccoli in
Mhm.
Phoenix is going to immediately go to seed. It's not going to do you any good whatsoever.
Because it's too
And
hot.
because it's too hot. And
Yeah.
then in the fall, in October, they'd bring in watermelons and cucumbers and that kind of, again, wrong season. So to put the name of the biggest city near you, So for me, it was Asheville and planting calendar. And do a search for that and find a local planting calendar. Often it's the cooperative extension. There's also all kinds of other ones out there, but get yourself a planting calendar.
Yeah, I think you could probably just like Google that, right? And
Yes,
so then you can see what your zone is, right? Is that what you're
yes.
talking about? Like your zone for, right? Because I agree with you. I've gone to like Home Depot and in like March or April, you see they're starting to get the seedling, the plant, like the small plants, and you see
Hmm.
tomatoes there. And like you're not putting those in the ground right now. It's too cold and they will
Yeah,
not live. And why are they doing that? They're just trying to
yeah.
push, I guess, push plants or
Well, interestingly, I did a lot of media when I was in Phoenix, and I had one of the TV stations ask me to quantify how much of the stuff at a big box store was actually climate and season appropriate for Phoenix. And I did a general survey at a big box store, and over 50% of the food plants that they were selling were either not climate appropriate, so they needed to be in a zone 6 and we were in a zone 9 there, or season appropriate. So make sure that you do your homework about that. And it's super simple. I have a planting calendar for the low desert. It's a 2-page document. You download it from my website. It's free, and it tells you to plant cucumbers in March, and it tells you what to plant when. So that's a big one. The soil we already talked about. Um, Getting a garden in a place where it gets enough sun is a really
yes.
important piece too.
Hmm.
Uh, if you in the northern hemisphere, if you plant a garden on a north side of a structure, it's highly likely not ever going to get enough sun to make food. And you're just kind of out of luck right there. So making sure that you place your garden and your garden pots in a sunny location.
Right. How many hours do you think needs to happen for a successful garden of
That's a great,
sunlight? Yeah.
yeah, that's a great question. And so first of all, sunlight, there's two things. There's light and heat. So the heat was something very big that we need to address in the low desert. So an eastern exposure was great in the desert because we'd get sun from sun up until about noon or 1 o'clock, and then there'd be shade in the afternoon. But back to your question, what it really depends on is what you're growing. So herbs and lettuce greens and things that don't make a fruit or a vegetable can go with less sunlight, maybe 4, 5, 6 hours a day. Things that make a fruit, like a peach tree or a vegetable like a zucchini, are going to need more like 6 to 8 hours of light. And then if you're in the desert, you have to manage for the heat.
Yeah. Good point. Good point that, right, that the heat is a
Oh, yeah.
huge factor in it, right? So even growing, I know here I'm growing lettuce right now, but by July, I'm probably not growing lettuce, too, because
Exactly.
it will bolt, it will not be a great plant. But then I'll start planting it again in the fall, right? Because it's
Right.
cooler
Yeah.
and I'm still getting a decent amount of light.
Often with lettuce, when it starts to bolt, it goes bitter. So,
Yeah.
but at that point, you want to save the seeds and spread the seeds around your garden
Yeah.
because
Well, that's advanced.
it doesn't have to be. It can be as simple as that you let it go to flower and it makes seeds and the seeds blow in your yard just like they would in nature. And
Mhm.
then a lettuce plant comes up over here. It's really that simple.
Yeah, no, and that's fantastic. But let's see if people can just grow a couple heads of lettuce first and and be successful with that. I know the other no-brainer thing is water, right? I mean,
Mhm.
is there anything special about water or how much water to be had? I know that in the desert, I can't even imagine
Yeah.
how that was working, but you must have needed a lot of water.
Yes. So for small gardens, you can hand water, and what I highly suggest that people do is get yourself a $9 moisture meter from your nursery. and use it. And usually, they're like on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being the wettest and one being the driest. And you want to make sure that you're paying attention to your pots and your gardens and making sure that the water meter doesn't go below about 3 or 4. Often plants like to dry out in between, but not completely dry out. And soil will go phobic. So if it dries out too much, then trying to get it wet again takes a really big project. The biggest thing that kills people's plants is that they forget to water. And so if you're growing a garden, you just need to walk out in your garden every day and pay attention, see what's happening.
Yeah, you have to give it some attention. You can't just
Yeah.
let it go and do its own thing. So I think there's so many people who just ask me, like, I've been growing my containers, or I've been trying to grow some vegetables, and something's not working. But I think we talked about the sunlight, the
Hmm.
soil, and the water. And if one of those is out of balance, that's probably
Probably it. Yeah.
probably one of the answers as to why your garden is not growing correctly. And you really do need good soil. I think
Here's
is
the
the most important.
yeah, here's the other thing. You're going to kill some plants. It happens.
Yes,
And I promise you, maybe not you, but I promise you, I've killed more plants than most of your listeners out there. Not on purpose. It's just, oh, okay, that didn't work. I won't do that
absolutely.
again. That's how
Yeah.
we learn.
Every
And
year is a learning experience within the
yes,
garden.
absolutely. And here's the downside of your first garden. And that is that, and my friend Zach from Arizona Worm Farm reminded me recently, Greg, your first garden is your worst garden. Now, my first garden in Phoenix, Arizona was in 1975. And I
Hmm.
gardened since then. I had gardened. And I moved here, and my first garden here was a miserable failure. It was just like, eh. And
Uh-huh.
and then that's when he reminded me, your first garden is your worst garden. It's like, well, why would I even know that? Because I haven't had a first garden since 1975. So
Yeah.
just have, your listeners just pay attention. You may kill a few plants, and that's how we learn.
Yeah. Well, you're now in a totally different climate
Exactly.
with more seasons. The seasons are different. And yeah, so that's very understandable. I mean, I know my first garden back many, many years ago too was a complete, I just was clueless, and I was just growing things
Hey,
indoors under lights first, but like in January, and they were like, I was like had a jungle in my basement for a while before
nice.
I was not,
Well,
but we learned. That's how we
yeah,
learned.
yeah, exactly. My friend Kari Spencer, she's written some books on urban farming. Her first garden 20 years ago, she went out in the backyard, dug some dirt out of the backyard, put it in pots, and planted some plants in there, and they immediately died. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Good, healthy soil in the pots, good, healthy soil in the garden. So for garden beds, I've been doing raised garden beds here because I have more control over the soil in them. And one of the things I want to share with your listeners is that I will spend $30 on a garden bed. And all I do is I get 12-inch, 2-inch by 12-inch tall untreated boards, and I screw them together. A garden bed can be that simple, and that's $30. And I'll spend $300 on the soil going in the garden bed. And I've done that since I've gotten here. I've probably spent $2,500 on garden bed soil. And
Yeah.
that's a big upfront expense. And I wanted my garden beds to go right now. I wanted food to grow. And then what I do with those garden beds is I'll get some good organic compost, and every year I'll add, maybe an inch on top of the garden beds. So that becomes the task going into the future. And for a 10 by 3 garden bed, I'll spend maybe $30 on compost a year. So I spent the $300 to fill the garden bed, but then in future years, it's really simple. It cost me $30. I add nice compost. I'm making my own worm compost.
Yeah, so you're not then starting with the dirt that's in the ground and having to amend that and balance that
Exactly.
soil. You're just starting with like at a with a good base with
Yes.
really high quality soil and then adding compost every year to it just to amend it, right? Because it has to because
Yeah.
every time you grow vegetables, they pull some of the nutrients out of the soil.
Yep.
So you need to
Yeah.
keep amending your soil, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
So I want to talk about then compost because some people don't even know what compost is, but I know that it's,
Mm,
for me, I cook a lot. So I am, I'm a chef and nutritionist. So I am making a lot of food scraps, vegetable scraps and fruit scraps and
yep.
everything. And I am a huge proponent of composting in
Hmm.
your own home because I can't even imagine the amount of garbage I would create if I didn't compost.
Right.
So that so just describe like what compost is. I mean, it's just broken down vegetable scraps and
Yep.
fruit scraps, right? And anything else to add in there?
Yeah. And I give a class called non-composting because composting or thermophilic hot composting, it's not easy. It takes quite the amount of materials and process to make it happen. But basically, what you're doing is you're adding 30% greens, which is your kitchen scraps, and 70% browns, which can be leaves, straw, that kind of stuff, and mixing them all together and letting them get hot. And that hot is the microbes breaking down the stuff. And it's
Hmm.
about a 6-month process to do it properly. And then it makes this nutrient dense fertilizer for your garden, essentially.
Yeah,
And and
which
I
is
did
free, right? Then it's
which
free. Then you're not
exactly,
buying anything.
exactly, which is free. And uh, it's a hard process to do. And so I actually have other suggestions for people. The simplest thing to do once you have your garden, the simplest thing to do is called pit composting. And what you do is you just take your kitchen scraps and you go out in your garden where you're not growing something and you go down about 12 inches, dig a hole, pour this stuff in, cover the hole back up. And what happens is the worms arrive and the microbes arrive and nature does what it does down in that hole. And over time, it'll make really healthy soil in that space. So that's the simplest way to go.
That's pretty much what I do.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. The
Well, because
second,
I have so many scraps, that's
right?
my other, like I use so much that it's like I can't
Hmm.
I need right it and it does take a while to break it all down, but so that is I agree with you. That is one of the easiest ways to do it rather
Yeah.
than buying you can buy compost bins and turners, right? I mean, I've done that all. They break, they get
Yeah.
because I don't because I have so much.
And they're
So
expensive and
yeah,
yeah.
they're expensive, right?
The second thing I suggest people do is worm composting. And there's this really, really cool product on the market from Urban Worm Bin, and it's shaped like a funnel. And
Okay.
the cool things about worms is that they travel up. When you add new food scraps on the top, they will work their way up the worm bin. So Urban Worm Bin has a funnel worm composting bin. So it's shaped like a funnel, and once it's established, you just add the worm food or your kitchen scraps on the top layer. The worms process them as they move up, and then once about every 6 or 7 months, you open the hatch down at the bottom of the worm bin, and the worm castings fall out.
Which is
And
then the compost that you put into your soil.
exactly. Worm castings or worm poop it's worm compost. It's really, really good for your garden. The third thing I highly suggest that people do is if you have a yard that's secure, get some chickens. Hens are great composters. They eat your food scraps. They will eat bugs and weeds. They give you eggs every day, practically every day. They're great diggers. They're great fun friends. They're great pets to have. And then that manure is amazing for your garden.
Yeah, that's also a form of compost too, right?
Yeah.
I know I have chickens. I know they eat a lot of the food scraps, right? They'll eat
Yep.
pretty much anything. And
Yeah.
then, right. And then, so that's another cycle, right? That we go
Yes.
through. And then even the eggshells you can put in the compost bin. And
Exactly.
so so they are really important, I think, to have in a garden. But, you talked about the worm composting, and I wanted to just talk about urban farming or urban gardening, right? Because
Hmm.
that's the name of your business. So is there, so we're talking like with the assumption that people have decks and yards and a place to put a compost bin. But
Yep.
what if you are living in the middle of a city, or you don't have the space, like maybe you just have a little deck off of your apartment,
Hmm.
or how is worm composting something you could do in
Absolutely.
an apartment?
Yep, absolutely. It can be done inside. And
Hmm.
the like a 33-gallon tote, there's ways that you can use the totes. The thing is that the worms will stay in the bin. And
Okay.
in Phoenix, Arizona, it's hard to grow worms in the summertime because it's just so dang hot. So, keeping them in a cool corner of your house, they'll do the processing for you, and then it's just as easy to harvest the worm castings out of there and put it on your house plants or put it on your plants.
Okay.
And you just
Yeah.
add it to the top.
Okay. So no fear of worms escaping and getting
No,
all
not
over
at
your
all.
house. Okay. Is there any other? No, I was going to ask like if there's any other solutions to all the food scraps and everything. I mean, like I know it like in Manhattan, for example. I mean, I think that they're about to start a mandatory food
Hmm.
composting initiative. Are there places like if I just have so many food scraps, I can't like handle it, but I do want to compost.
Hmm.
Where does that go? Like, are there places that would take my food scraps?
Very likely. In San Diego, they have a community composting program set up. I've had the founders on my podcast before. In Phoenix, there's something called Recycled City. And JD is a student of mine when I was teaching at Arizona State University, and he started this company where he's collecting the food scraps from restaurants and homes and turning it into compost. So there are in major metropolitan areas, and even in your small metro area, they might have something like that that is heading that direction. I know that there's cities that are implementing mandatory, I think places, maybe even California has a mandatory food scrap program. Because here's the thing, in Phoenix, we did some research back about 15 years ago, and from the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, we pulled this data from them. In Phoenix, Arizona, a metropolitan area of about 4.7 million people, they estimated, and I'm gonna have you guess the time frame on this. 1,100 tons. I'm gonna say that again. 1,100 tons of food waste every
I'm going to say 7 days.
day.
Oh, every day.
1,100 tons of food waste every day
Oh,
in
that
the
makes me
Phoenix metropolitan.
crazy.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And so when it goes into the landfill, it's just making methane. When it goes into my garden, it's making healthy, happy soil.
Right. Right. Oh, yeah, that angers me.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Um,
so there are easy ways to take initiative and
yes.
compost your food scraps. And
There's the ways that we've talked about. There's bokashi composting that you can do at home. There's black soldier fly composting that you can do at home if you have chickens. There's so many ways that you can process food waste that isn't traditional thermophilic composting.
I imagine if wherever my listeners live, I mean, you could probably it's Google,
Yep.
see where you can,
Yeah.
if composting doesn't feel like your thing, but at least you want to get your food scraps to a composting facility, I'm sure that there's something around you.
Exactly. Just like the planting calendar, do a, compost search for, who's making compost in my area.
Yeah. Well, Greg, this has been really helpful. I think just to sum up, if you're gardening 101, you really just want to get into it. Now it's spring, at least here, and people are ready to plant. Really good soil, right? We talked about composting, sunlight, concerns about heat, maybe not having things too hot, good water, a planting calendar, and I think a moisture meter, right? To make
Yeah,
sure your plants
very
don't dry
good.
out.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
think I got
I
it.
I did put together a series of how to build healthy soil videos, and you can find it at
Okay.
healthysoilhacked.com.
Oh, okay, great. So yeah,
That's
my next question was, how do people get in touch with you, and how do you work with people, and with your gardening initiatives and everything?
yeah. I do garden consults with people virtually. Um,
Okay.
and you can find out about them at urbanfarm.org. We do the podcast, urbanfarmpodcast.com. And just jump in and be curious.
So it
And
sounds
then
like you have a lot of videos and resources
oh
also.
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right,
Yeah.
great. Well, I will definitely link that all in the show notes so people can
We
reach
do
out to you.
cool. We do have one of our courses. It's called Growing Food the Basics. It's 9 lessons on how to get your garden started. And you can find that on our education page. And right now, this first half of 2024, it's on sale for $29.
Oh, great. That's like practically giving it away. Okay.
Exactly.
Good. Great timing. So I'll link that in the show notes. And thank you
Awesome.
so much. It's
You
been really
bet. This
nice
has
to
been a
talk to someone
blast.
who's as enthusiastic about gardening as I am.
Right.
And I'm gonna this afternoon get into my garden again and just
Yeah.
start my planting. So thank
I'm
you
sitting
so
out
much.
here
Okay.
this last weekend. I bought a bunch of plant starts because I'll do plant starts and then I'll interplant with seeds. And
Yes.
so I'm sitting out here looking at about 100 plant starts that are going
Oh,
in the
you
next
are
day or
okay. Oh,
two.
I know. I can't wait.
Yeah,
I know I'm about to I'm about to do the same. I'm excited.
cool.
These are the little things that get me happy. So thank you so
Right.
much again. Yes. And happy gardening.
Thank you, Heather.
And as always, if you loved this podcast, please consider gifting me with a 5-star review. It is so helpful for me to get the word out on real eating, our real bodies, and real food stories. Thank you so much and have a great week. Bye for now.